Sorry. Quick status, I guess, on where we are with things. We have two motions for the board. One of them, we're waiting for Director Thronson to come back in. But on number 5.
Do we want to go there now? They are here.
No, she's here. We can do that.
Okay.
Okay.
Is this for 13.4, Chair Hansen?
This is 12.4. Is it 13.4? Yeah, sorry, 13.4.
Thank you.
Jennifer Thronson, Director of Teaching and Learning, and give me 1 minute to read those itty-bitty numbers, and then we will move on.
So Jennifer will be presenting the queuing rubric for standards survey and revision cycle, and then the board needs to review that and determine if the standards need to be queued for revision. So we'll need to have a board vote on this after we look at the data.
All right, I will try and make this a little bit bigger if I can find that. So each year we do an annual kind of queuing rubric that looks at various criteria that the board has set on whether standards need to be revised out of sequence. So we have the 7-year timeline that you have heard today for world language, that at the 7 years, that's our timeline that says it's time to review these standards, and then the board actually makes the call on whether to review the standards. Each year we do a queuing rubric to see if we need to queue something out of sequence that is not at their 7 years. So for example, world language in a few years might be at a higher mark, and you might say, yep, we skipped it a few years ago, but it's ready now. That's the opportunity that this sheet kind of lays out. So on the left is the content area. In the middle is the scoring from the rubric. And then on the right is the year that it's actually up for revision. So for example, English language arts is currently being revised and has been since 2020, 2021. We will have that draft out for you, at least for approval for a draft in a couple more months, it sounds like. It was a 0.42. Typically, things at 0.4 have queued us for revision. They have enough saying we need more rigorous standards, we need updated standards, research has changed, the field is calling for a change, that it kind of contributes to that factor. Where when we looked at world languages earlier today, that was a 0.13. That's a really low score on the scoring rubric, didn't cause us alarm to say, yep, we need to proceed on with that 7-year revision. But we always go out and look at the annual survey that we do as well from the public. We had over 2,000 responses this year on that survey. And for world languages, their complaints were we want more options for languages and more opportunities to take a language. It was nothing related to the standards. So that kind of gave us additional food for thought. And then we survey the community. When the survey, when we're thinking, ooh, maybe a revision's not needed, we survey world language teachers to say, what are your feelings? And in this case, they were in agreement that this wasn't necessary at this time. So those are kind of the 3 layers we have in place. 2 of them are required by board policy, and 1 is just us doing an additional check-in with the actual teachers teaching those courses to ensure that they feel what our data is kind of proving to be. So you'll see the kind of results here. Social studies is a good example. We have secondary that was reviewed a few years ago, and so, but you also have elementary. It's a K-12 rubric, and so you'll see it's kind of medium high. It's not quite 0.4, but elementary is under revision right now, but that's because secondary was reviewed just a few years ago, and so secondary kind of brings that score down, or if it were only elementary, you'd probably see it. We might start breaking those apart to when they have been separate revisions. Typically, we've been doing pre-K-12 revisions at this time. So with that said, there are no rubrics that scored above that 0.4 threshold that we've typically seen as kind of being a queuing. Your highest ones that you have there are physical education. They're coming up in a couple of years. One of the things we have to keep in mind is how many standards we have up at one particular time, especially in elementary. So right now, elementary social studies will be out this next year. English language arts will be out next year. Math is up the following year. And then you also have physical education. Those are all subjects an elementary teacher would be responsible for, so it's a lot. So keeping the sequence, one of the reasons they're split out that way is to try not to inundate teachers with multiple standards at one time. Social studies has taken longer than desired. We started that one in 2019. COVID has really put kind of a hurdle in getting that one done in a timely manner, which is why we'll have social studies and English language arts coming out in the same school year. They won't have to be adopted right away, but they will be released in the same year. So with that said, if there's questions about need, the big action for today is, do you want to cue anything out of revision cycle, given these factors?
Seeing no lights, Chair Hansen, do you have a motion?
Now, the motion for the board then is that we, after reviewing the queuing rubric, do not take any action to queue any revisions out of the cycle.
Okay, there's a motion on the floor that the board approves the results of the overall queuing rubric rating survey. Those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Thank you.
Okay, one more motion from the committee. This is on, I'm numbered different on this one, but the motion is on the CTE standards, that the board approve the CTE core standards with the exception to the standards for teaching as a profession 3 section.
It's a little different than the one that I have, so.
Is that a different motion than what you have?
That's okay. Would you say it one more
Okay.
time?
Yeah, I'm reading from my memo that I just pulled up from board docs, or from civic clerk. So the committee moves that the board approve the CTE core standards with the exception to the standards for teaching as a profession 3 section.
Exception 3.
That-
There's a motion on the floor. Oh, sorry, Board Member Earl.
Yes, I would like to make an amendment on page 269. I would like us to add counter ACEs to standard 4. Under it's investigate the common causes of family stress, crisis, and ways to build resilience. It talks about ACEs, but I think there's enough research currently about, I'm talking to it. Does anyone want to second it? Sorry.
I don't know what it is, actually.
Okay, to page 264 on the CTE standards.
264, I wrote 269.
Oh, I'm sorry, 269.
269.
My apologies. Standard 4.
Do we need to have
Page?
a second if it's out of committee? We do, right?
No,
But the
so
motion is out of committee, but
The
does the
amendment.
amendment
the
need a
amendment would need a
second?
second.
Yeah.
Okay,
I'll second it.
269.
okay, Board Member Klein. Would you like to speak to your amendment?
Just that we're talking about ACEs, and there's such valuable research out right now about counter ACEs and how these counter ACEs are beneficial for overcoming childhood trauma, childhood ACEs and such, that I think it needs to be a part of the dialogue that's going on here. So they talk about coping methods and building resiliency, building a support system, but this dialogue, I think, is valuable enough research that I think it should be incorporated in here.
I'm going to ask a clarifying question.
Yeah.
What is counter ACEs? The things you just listed? Is that what?
Not necessarily.
what
It's
ACEs
those
are, but-
things that build resiliency in kids. And I could go through a list of them, but there's just research out of, well, specifically BYU, but around the nation, there's additional research that's just showing that kids that have counter ACEs, that would be supportive environments. Sorry, I should get the list out, huh? Anyways, that it's showing that it actually counteracts the negative effects that have taken place in a childhood's, in children's youth. Give me a second and I can look it up.
I don't know, I've never heard of it. What's the actual name of it?
No, adverse childhood
ACEs
experiences.
I know what ACEs are, I just don't know what counter ACEs are. Seems like the opposite of ACEs.
Counter ACEs like
Could I-
eating
I
dinner with your
get that,
family or.
but superintendent's saying that's not what it's actually called. Is that what it's called?
Yeah.
Go ahead, Board Member Earl.
There are a variety of terms. It's in the same type of a, same type of a mold. In other words, what protective factors could be termed the same thing, right? So,
Okay. Did we have staff that wanted to weigh in on that, or are we? Okay. There is, did someone write down the amendment? There's an amendment on the floor to include on page 269, we call it counter ACEs, of standard 4. Staff, do we call it counter ACEs? Is that what the formal title is? in the research?
Sorry, yes, counter ACEs is an acceptable
Sure.
way to say that. Mhm.
And is ACEs already included? Brent Straight is saying ACEs and counters.
Yes.
Okay, so to include counter ACEs to standard 4. Right. Those in favor say, no, Superintendent Dixon?
Yes, and I wasn't trying to say that's not what it's called. I was trying to just describe what counter means in this case, that it's not, I don't think, Board Member Earl, you were saying, you were objecting to ACEs or counter used in a perspective that how do you overcome the impact of ACEs, right?
That's accurate. It's not a removal of ACEs from the dialogue, but it's just adding a broader,
To ameliorate.
yeah.
Okay,
So that we're, yeah.
thank you. Board Member Lear?
I wondered, can I ask a question of the motion maker?
Yes.
I'm just wondering if if you had this discussion in your committee meeting? I didn't have a chance to listen.
No, remember, we're on page 269. I did not have the discussion. So yes,
You didn't have the discussion?
no,
Or anything similar that your committee?
not
members
even
weighed-
close.
Weighed in on?
Nope.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Board Member Straight?
So adverse childhood experiences have a great impact on students. And this is referring to advantageous childhood experiences. So I think they balance each other out just fine.
So what
And-
you're adding is you want teachers to teach
Be aware of things that they could,
advantageous
yes.
childhood experiences.
How do we in education, how do we in schools, how do we support creating advantageous childhood experiences to counter? Yeah, you can look at it from several different ways, actually. But yeah,
That makes sense. Thank you. Seeing no other lights, we have a motion on an
Vice Chair,
amendment.
sorry, my light's
Oh.
already on because I was speaking.
I'm
but
sorry,
I have a
Chair
question
Hansen.
for staff, if that's okay.
Please.
Counter ACEs were not included in the original draft from the writing committee. And now we're looking to add that. Is there a reason that they weren't considered and added? Were they considered and rejected, or?
Yeah, they were just overlooked. So I'm glad that they were brought forward.
Could you introduce yourself and say
I'm
that
so
one more
sorry.
time?
Yes. I'm Lola Ship. I'm specialist at CTE. And yes, we just overlooked that. So I'm glad that Representative Earl brought that forward.
Thank you. Deputy Superintendent Norman?
Yes, Patty Norman, Deputy Superintendent. I just gave to Board Member Earl the list. There, right now, it's being looked at as two different ways. And so just to be clear in the motion for the board, the suggestion maybe moving forward from staff is to clarify with the definition of counter ACEs so that it's taken as intended by the board member submitting the motion, which is the first way is you would say that you're actually against ACEs and don't believe in that, or the second way is to say we're countering the adverse effects of ACEs. So in order to be clear and not worry about which definition, state the definition instead of the word.
So do we have a
Oh,
revised motion
have a
for an
definition
amendment?
That's what it includes.
Well, okay, and this is what's come out of the study. It says the full list of counter ACEs includes having good friends, neighbors. I'm just trying, feeling comfortable with yourself and predictable home routine like regular meals and bedtimes, having a caregiver whom you feel safe with. That's not really a definition, so.
That's the examples of.
That's the examples.
Do you have the definition there? Board Member Hanson?
Yeah, just another question. So we have coping methods to build resiliency. We have building a support system. Those are already included as ways to build resilience. Are the things that are in these counter ACEs, are those something that would be outside of those two general definitions?
I think it's more than that. I just think the research currently is coming out of this particular narrative. And so I think that's a valuable thing for us to be looking at is the current research that's surrounding this.
Is this a timely motion? I mean, is it possible to go have your committee figure out all the language on this and then bring it back next month? Or is this something we have to do right now?
It probably
Yeah,
does
if
need
the
a while.
question's for me, we carved out one of the CTE standards to take a look further because that was raised in committee, and we wanted to push the rest of them forward to the board. Now, this one's come up. I defer to staff as to whether this is time sensitive, but at the time, for example, with the teaching CTE standard, we pulled that out because we needed more discussion. So is this time sensitive? It needs to be passed today?
So the only consideration I would ask is that we have several of our post-secondary folks who are bringing this forward for concurrent enrollment opportunities. And that is a December process. So the quicker we can get it done, the better.
So,
Thank you.
So we have an emotion on the board. Is this your motion, Board Member Earl? Does that,
yes, it is.
Okay.
I don't think in CTE they're going to misunderstand what this means. I don't think so. It's not like we're going to teach ACEs and then we're going to say, we're going to teach that it's false. Does that make sense? That's not the case. They're going to understand what this narrative is. I
you're
think
going to
it's,
define it with examples and stuff, such in there?
yeah, the others aren't defined either in here. Things are listed out in a, chronological order, or not a chronological order, in an order, so.
Okay.
What,
Brent, straight?
why don't we list ACEs and, use the word and, counter ACEs?
Yeah.
I think that would solve the issue, I think.
Is that a friendly change?
Yes.
Board Member Earl?
Yes, I think that would be completely appropriate. I don't think it's going to be mischaracterized in this
Okay.
case.
Board Member, what? Board Member Earl? I mean, Board Member Lear?
No, never mind. Well, yes, here's my concern. Board Member Earl says the research shows. I'm not sure what research you're citing. I'd love to know research from where, research by whom. Is this the majority of psychologists or CTE professionals? I'm just concerned that and your committee did not review this, so I don't have the committee's joint explanation of yes, this is a good thing. It just seems like a random thing to be putting in there in the moment.
Well, we do have information that just came from right here from Lola, who said she's aware of the content and that this, unless I'm inaccurate, she's familiar with it. This is something that the dialogue, like I said, is going on. So even if I'm not trustable, and I'm not suggesting you're saying that, but I'm not the researcher, I could provide that for you. That's all I'm implying, is that we do have a validation here from people that work in that field and that put those together.
I'm
So-
going to move on to Board Member Moss and ask Board Member Earl, and if you don't want to do this, that's okay, and staff, is there a word to call this other than counter ACEs? Because I know ACEs, I had never heard of counter ACEs, and it sounds to me like just opposite. So is there a word that defines this that doesn't sound like counter? Board Member, Deputy Superintendent Norman.
Instead of saying ACEs, if we write it out as adverse childhood experiences, and then the article also calls this positive childhood experiences.
Would that be
So
amenable to you,
adverse
Board Member
and
Earl?
positive
It seems
childhood
much more
experiences.
clear to a layperson who would read the standard. Board Member Moss?
Just a brief comment in favor. I'm not an expert here, but I know what ACEs are. And as we're trying to get away from deficit thinking towards positive, I just like the idea that you put this in there and they can figure out how to share it. It sounds like it's a well-understood term, and we're going to talk about the negatives they might have, and we're also going to talk about how to create the positives. I don't see any
Yeah.
downside to throwing it in there.
I like it too, but worded differently.
Looks like positive childhood experiences is.
But
there
it's a
as
term in
well.
the
Maybe we
BYU
just
research,
add
but
it.
is it a widely known term by lots of researchers? If you all feel that way, then let's just leave it. I'm not making an amendment or anything, so you don't have to change it, Jenny. It's your thing. So move forward this way.
I'm happy to change it to positive childhood experiences so that there's no mischaracterization there and misunderstanding. But counter ACEs is a common term that many in the research field understand.
Okay. So are we good to move forward? there's a motion to amend Strand 7, Standard 4 of CTE course, individual and family relationships to include adverse childhood experiences and positive childhood experiences on page 269. Is that the accurate motion, Board Member Earl?
Could I ask, is that an amendment of the main motion?
It's an
which is to
amendment of the
adopt
main
all of
motion.
So we need to have somewhere in there that we're going to adopt all of the CTE courses. That's just dealing with Strand 7.
That comes next, right? Because this is an amendment.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
No, she's got to amend the original motion, and this is a standalone motion. Right?
It says motion to amend, so it just should be amend.
Yeah, she's amending your motion that you've already made.
She's not with the motion that's up there. She's amending Strand 7, Standard 4 of CTE course, and we're adopting all of the
Okay.
CTE course.
So we need to say,
So look at the original
motion to amend the motion and put the language of the original motion in
Yeah,
after motion.
yeah.
It's a lot of motions.
It is. So the original motion was that the board approve the CTE course standards with the exception to the standards for teaching as a profession 3 section. And then it would be, and with an amendment to Strand 7, Standard 4, because we've got to get all of these passed, not just amend Strand 7
Can you repeat after, with the exception of teaching as
as a profession 3 section.
section 3?
So, yeah.
Sorry,
with
that's not written on my motion.
Yeah.
So,
So- exception of the standards for teaching as a profession 3 section
okay.
up there. I was just trying to read that. I can read it one more time.
No, I've got it, I think, that the board approve, your motion is that the board approves the CTE course standards, draft 1, with the exception of teaching as a profession, section 3.
With the exception to the standards for teaching as a profession 3. That's the section. It's called teaching as a profession 3.
So that's not in. Is that going to be up there somewhere? I know, but she's making an amendment. I've got to figure out where to put her. We need to vote on the amendment before we vote on the main motion. We just have to refer to the main motion in this. Do we have to do all the language of the main motion?
Well, the amendment has to add or take away from, right?
Yes.
But it has to pass on its own.
Yeah, and then you.
Yeah,
And
so
then
she
we-
would amend the motion to be that motion, and then we vote on
And then
that.
we vote on,
So
Yeah.
are we okay to say a
amended.
motion to amend the motion? Do we have to do all the language of your motion is what I'm asking. Do we have some staff that can help us write down the language of this amendment?
Would it just be amend?
I think so.
That one's a standalone motion, right? It's there.
Yeah, that's what I
yeah.
think we're supposed to do.
so her
We'll
amendment,
let them sort it out. We'll get it.
so you add her stuff about.
Right, that's what I think.
Yeah, you're right.
Yeah, but
But you're saying maybe we have to do all the language of your motion in her amendment?
well, if she's going to amend the main motion. Basically. It's to amend a certain section of the CTE standard. The main motion was to adopt all of those standards.
But, so within yours, you want to approve all of those standards. Is yours, Jenny, within his?
Yes.
So then she should be able to amend. Pass the amendment and then
And then
pass
make
the
your full
original
So
motion
we're
as
not
amended.
amending the motion.
Oh,
Yes.
her motion.
As amended. So there's a motion on the board to,
So it's not a motion to amend, it's just her motion.
You're
That's
right.
what's got me
That's
fouled
what you're
up.
trying to say. She has a separate emotion that's
Just a
not an
motion,
amendment.
Not an amendment to my motion.
So, do we need to go back and pass his,
No, we're good. We can vote on hers
Okay.
just as a straight motion, and then we can.
all right, we have a motion on the floor to amend Strand 7, Standard 4 of CTE course, individual and family relationships to include adverse childhood experiences and positive childhood experiences on page 269 of Standard 4. Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed?
Okay, now, back to this one.
There's a motion on the floor that the committee moves that the board approve the CTE course standards with exception to the standards for teaching as a profession 3 section. Those in favor say aye.
Hold on. As
As
amended.
amended, those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed?
Okay.
Wow.
Whoa.
Now, listen, I don't know if we're going to be able, can we move 328 to the end? Because we still have board member comments and we have 6 minutes. All right, if we can do this in 5 minutes.
2 minutes.
Well, they may be important. We have board member comments that need to be made, so you can, but other people may not. Okay, let's go back to 328 and see if we can do this housekeeping very, very quickly. Okay, let's just see. Back to. Okay, we're going back to item 9. So this is what happened the last time we were there. We were at this, we've already talked through all this. We've already had our discussion and our debate. But what happened in the motion was that we passed the rule and not the slides, if I'm understanding this correctly. So we do need to pass the slides. And so you're up. Okay. Board Member Lear.
I move that the board approve slides 1 through 16 of the training materials for R277-328, Educational Equity in Schools, Resources for Implementation document.
Do we have a second? Okay. Board Member Hutchings is the second. Would you like to speak to the motion?
I had this discussion before. I think this puts teachers in a very awkward place because academic freedom is
You're not talking about that one yet. That's her motion.
I think we need to approve these very appropriately and have them officially approved by the board.
Thank you,
Sorry.
Board Member Hutchings.
Oh my God, I can't even do that right.
Board
Fire me now.
Member Hutchings. No.
I think it's a good motion and we should vote for it.
She is the second also.
She's the second.
Hutchings is the second.
Do you want to speak to it? You want to speak to how good these slides are? 1 through 16.
So do you have an amendment or an additional motion?
Separate.
A separate motion. Okay. Board Member Klein.
Oh, I have an amendment to the
Okay.
slides.
Okay.
Is this the time?
You have an amendment to her motion?
Slides 1 through 16.
So yours would be a separate amendment
After we
after
do
her
theirs?
motion, I
Okay.
believe, right? Unless you're
Stacy's
amending something inside slides 1 through 16.
Is it slide 16? Is it how many slides are
The
there?
very last one is 17. There's
Okay,
17.
so I
Okay,
have-
so then we can vote on this one. So there's a motion on the floor
I do have one within that.
within 1 through 16.
Uh-huh.
Okay. Go ahead.
So what slide is that? It's the parental responsibility one. I don't know what number it is.
15.
15. Okay. So I make a motion to strike that slide in total.
Okay. There's a motion on the floor to strike the slide parental responsibility in total, I don't know what that means, as outside the scope of the Rule 328 and in conflict with existing law. Would you like to speak to the do we have a second? Would you like, thank you, Board Member Earl. Would you like to speak?
Yes. So again, the specific actions of parents parents must take to initiate a complaint do not fall under the purview of the state board to dictate. Also, an LEA must ensure a formal complaint process. According to the rule, it's the LEA that must ensure that formal complaint process, but the USBE as a body doesn't have any authority to bind a parent's action to a sole complaint process or dictate the content or expression of a parent's complaint. There are already laws in place that govern what restrictions the state can, or more importantly, cannot make on any person's freedom of speech. If this slide remains, the USBE would be deliberately overstepping its statutory authority to advise LEAs as to prohibitions they can place on parental expression. Also, this slide uses antagonistic language that deliberately associates parents' complaints with criminal behavior. Doxing. This obviously presents parents in a negative light. The USBE cannot cast parents as an adversary on one slide and then claim that the success of 328 depends on engaging parents on another slide. If the USBE is to be in compliance with state code, to respect, protect, and further the interests of parents, then parents should be treated with due respect in our communications with LEAs, and negative assumptions should not be made about their behavior.
Thank you. There's a motion on the floor to strike the slide parental responsibility in total as outside the scope of Rule 328 and in conflict with this existing law. Board Member Hymas?
Yeah, I just don't see this as doing what Member Klein is seeing here. I see this as an opportunity for parents to understand how to get their concerns validated in the proper channels. Right? I don't think that by keeping this in, we're trying to say, you can't complain. We can't control that.
Board Member, thank you. Board Member Earl?
Yes, the title of this is parent responsibility, but that's not really what the content of most of this is. And I am, maybe I'm throwing this out there, but that process, we should be showing processes here instead of including for teachers as well. Of all the slides, this one's like messy. I don't know if that makes any sense. The others are very concise. They're easy to see. They're easy to read. They're easy to understand. And this one starts with parent responsibility, but then it doesn't really even articulate that. Does that make sense? So it's kind of incongruent, or so I can see what we're looking at here. I don't know necessarily about striking it, but cleaning it up. Yes.
Okay, thank you. And Board Member Hutchings had a question.
I just would like to call previous question.
Okay. We have a motion on the floor to call the question. Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Okay, we will go back then to, we have a motion on the floor to strike the slide parental responsibility in total as outside the scope of Rule 28 and in conflict with existing law. Those in favor say aye. That's Board Member Booth, Board Member Klein, and Board Member Earl. And that motion fails. Board Member Hutchings. Oh, we have to go back to yours. Right? Okay. So, so we have a motion on the floor that the board approves slide 1 through 16 of the R277328 Educational Equity in Schools Resources for Implementation document. We already had a second, right? Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Oh, I'm sorry, I missed your light. Board Member
Sorry, I
Craig.
wanted to make another amendment.
Okay, go ahead. It's
So
another amendment on this one.
217.
Oh, no, is this 17?
no, so it's on the same, so we already voted on that, so I just wanted to look at that slide again. 15 on the parental responsibility. It would make, if we're going to leave the slide there, it makes more sense based on the slide that comes before where it says parent complaint process. In the last bullet, says post a link on the school's website with contact information for the board's hotline. It makes more sense for the parent in slide 15 to be given where to make that complaint on the USBE's website. So we have a flow chart on the Utah Education Hotline that would make sense to put on that next slide to follow the parent complaint process slide. And that would give more information for the parent.
What is your motion?
So my motion would be to replace the parental responsibility slide with information from the Utah Education Hotline.
Do we have a
flow
second?
chart.
Point of order.
Okay,
I believe we were already asked to vote, so we need to complete the vote.
okay. Is that right? Can I not stop mid-sentence and see a light that?
Some of us had already started.
Or for Attorney Quisenberry or any of our policy experts, parliamentary experts?
You were just beginning to make the motion and then you stopped. So I would say it's your prerogative since you stopped to, and now you've started another one, so.
Okay, let's
Yeah.
just quickly vote on this one. Now I gotta find hers again. We have a motion on the floor. Can you quickly state yours, Board Member Klein, your new motion? And do we have a second on this, first of all? What is your motion?
My motion is to replace the parental responsibility slide, the information on it to include the USBE, Utah Education Hotline process for filing a complaint. Replace.
So there's a motion on the floor to replace 15 to state that USB hotline process be outlined. Do we have a second? Okay, let's move on. Board Member Hutchings. Now we vote back on that. Sorry, we have a motion on the floor to approve the slides 1 through 16 of Art 277-328, Educational Equity in Schools, Resources for Implementation Document. Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Okay, that passes unanimously. Go ahead, Board Member Hutchings.
I move to amend slide 17 and the associated speaker notes to replace preserve academic freedom with the following. Respect teachers' right to choose language and words appropriate for the curriculum content, age of the student, and the nature of the discussion.
Thank you. Do we have a second? Would you like to speak to your motion?
Sure, quickly. As we discussed in prior board meetings, the term academic freedom for K-12 teachers is not accurate and could be misleading and confusing to teachers in a training in which the purpose is to provide clarity and security. This amendment provides a more accurate and clear summary of the intention of this training.
Thank you. Board Member Earl? I see
Yes,
Madeline.
choose language and words appropriate. I'm not in agreement with that. Respect teachers' right to choose language and words appropriate for the curriculum. I'm not sure why we're doing that. I guess I can make an amendment to that. I don't know with the word, well, okay, I'd like to make an amendment.
Okay.
I can't see now. Thank you. Respect teachers' right to choose, do they choose the curriculum content even? That's an LEA that does that. Is that accurate? Because I would strike the choose language and words
Style of
appropriate.
instruction, they get
Yeah.
to choose that. That's the teachers. It's not.
Okay, let me think about that. I just, the words and, or the language and words part is,
While you're thinking about that, can we move to Board Member Klein and then Chair Hansen?
Well, I have another amendment for this slide.
You can only make it if Board Member Earl does not want to make it because, oh no, we already have an amendment. No. Yours is a motion. Okay, so we have no amendment on the table, so you can make an amendment.
Okay. So did we already pass that first one? Okay, so my amendment, I guess for the teacher section. Do you want to pull that up, Sybil?
Does it have to do with this motion?
no.
Is it amending this motion, this?
It's amending the 3 sections, teacher, or student, teacher, and administrator. Yeah, it's too small.
So we have to
You're going to have
vote-
to wait then, because this is,
We have to vote on this first, and then that would be
So I'm
separate.
checking.
Okay, so Board Member Earl?
no, I don't, I'll
Okay.
just have to vote against it.
Board Member, okay.
yeah.
Board Member Hansen?
I'll speak in favor of of this motion. I think that it preserves the intent of the rule. And the words academic freedom, I think, in this context, K-12, are probably better expressed. This is what teachers do every day. Curriculum's there, and they use their language and words to get the message across to their classes. And that's what we trust teachers to do, and I think this is an accurate representation of what that is.
Thank you. Seeing no other lights,
Okay,
we have
I
a
do have a
motion on the
motion.
floor.
I do have an amendment. I would strike choose language and words appropriate and put in, not choose, sorry, respect teachers' right to choose the application of curriculum content, anyways, and strike language and words.
Thank you. Do we have a second? Seeing none, let's go back to the original motion. We have a motion on the table to strike the words preserve academic freedom on slide 17 and add respect teachers' right to choose the application. Respect teachers' right to choose language and words appropriate for the curriculum content, age of the students, and the nature of discussion. Those in favor say aye.
Point of order.
Oh, point of order, go ahead.
The amendment is to, or the motion is to amend the slide and the associated speaker notes. And
Oh.
is to, wait, the motion is to approve,
Let me read,
sorry, because we're just.
let me read this. Is
Okay.
this,
Or we can do that, we can change the
this
words
sound
and then
right
approve
to
the
you?
slide.
is your motion to move to replace preserve academic freedom on slide 17 with the following? Respect teachers' right to choose language and words appropriate for the curriculum content, age of the students, and the nature of the discussion.
Yes, sorry, you are correct. To amend slide 17 and the associated speaker notes.
You can't amend the speaker notes. They're not on the agenda.
They were supposed to be.
Yes, well, we were told. Brian, do you want to speak to that?
We already passed the speaker notes. That's why, right?
Yeah, but we also asked that this,
This was needed to be on the
Yeah.
agenda.
So my
Got it
estimate
done.
was not, it's not on the agenda, it didn't make it on the agenda in the last 24 hours. But we did discuss, some email traffic earlier in the week that because the notes are associated with the slides, if you didn't amend the notes, then you're gonna have a contradiction there. And I think, and there's an example right now there, if you look up with preserve academic freedom is stricken or proposed to strike that in the slide, but if you don't strike the same language in the notes, then you've got a complete contradiction there. So my thinking is that the notes are just so aligned with the slides that that you just go ahead and amend the notes associated with the slide in question.
And that would also amend the slide then,
Yeah,
and the notes with it.
yeah. Well,
Okay.
amending the slide's not the issue, it's amending the notes. But I think, they're
Well, it's
just so.
both an issue.
But the the slides are noted up for today,
Okay.
whereas the speaker notes are
And
not.
this will really change both, is what you're saying, because they're so
Yeah,
connected.
if you don't, that's going to be a complete contradiction.
Okay. There's a motion on the table to replace preserve academic freedom on slide 17 with the following: respect teachers' rights to choose language and words appropriate for the curriculum content, age of the students, and nature of the discussion. Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Thank you. Okay, are we done?
A grammatical point.
Yeah, comma. You
Well,
see-
it says teachers, colon, and then it says respect teachers' right to choose. We want teachers to respect teachers' right to choose? Or do we just want the teachers to choose language and words appropriate? Oh, so what, oh,
What there?
so grammar, please have,
Teachers have the right to choose or
Grammatical changes.
will you just make grammatical changes? Thank you.
Thank you, board members. We have,
Can I make
Five?
my amendment?
okay, yes. Board member Klein has an
Okay.
amendment.
So I have a motion to amend slide summary and intent, the last slide, for consistency with the legislative intent of HB 901. Can I speak to that?
Please, well, wait, you have to make the motion first.
Okay, so under students, it would, and you've got this up there. Under students, it would say, will be provided with curriculum instruction, curriculum, instruction, and teacher training that does not promote, model, or contain divisive or discriminatory concepts based on race, color, nationality, etc. And under teachers, it would say, will model personal responsibility and create opportunities that respect and preserve the rights of all individuals. Will model the examination of various counterpoints to topics in an impartial manner. Will follow guidelines for appropriate classroom instruction as already established in State Code 53E-9-203. Activities prohibited without prior written consent. The title of that is Validity of Consent, Qualifications, Training on Implementation. That's from, that's the code. And R277-217, Educator Standards and LEA Reporting, and R277-328. And under administrators, it would say, will ensure LEA provided training to teachers complies with the intent of HB 901 and prohibits divisive and discriminatory concepts in curriculum and instruction. Will ensure a complaint process pursuant to R277-113-4, subsection 3, subsection 4, that will promote transparency and impartiality and fully engage parents.
We have a motion on the floor as stated. Do we have a second? We have a second. Board Member Earl, seconded. Seeing no lights for discussion, would you like to speak to your
To
motion?
speak to it, yes. Just for consistency with the legislative intent from the House and Senate resolutions, the purpose of this rule was to deal with the divisive concepts issue as it happens in professional learning as well as in the classroom. So regardless of how the current form 328 has taken, the actual intent of HR 901 on which it was based was a clear and simple prohibition on divisive concepts in curriculum standards and in teacher training. So we need to make that as clear as possible in the summary by making these changes.
Thank you. Jeff, can you get the whole thing on the screen by chance? Are you driving? Board Member Booth?
So I understand the need for clarity, but this seems, if I'm reading this as a teacher or really as a student or whoever, it feels like we're enemies. And I don't know what this feeling is, but I don't want to telegraph that that there's a problem. I want to clarify how we work together to achieve our common goal of educating and providing all the good things we're trying to provide. But this feels just, even, it's so clear, but it feels kind of dictatorial in a way that if there were a way to soften the language, say the same thing, but say it in a way that feels like we're friends. And these are the things that we'll do together in order to accomplish what we're trying to accomplish.
Thank you. Seeing no other lights, we have a motion on the board as written. Board Member Hart.
As not a member of this committee, can someone tell me why we have this slide?
Chair Hansen.
This slide, summary intent, why does it exist? Okay.
Seeing no other lights, we have a motion on the screen. Not there. Oh, that's okay. Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed?
No.
Will the ayes raise your hand? Board Member Klein, Board Member Hymas, and Board Member Earl. Do we see Laura's? No hand. So, and the rest are no. That motion. We'll give 3 minutes for board member comments. Oh, no, Board Member Hutchings.
I move the board approve the amended slide 17 for the R277328 Educational Equity and Schools Training presentation.
Do we have a second?
Second.
We have a motion on the floor as stated. Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed?
No.
We have noes are Board Member Klein, Hart, Hymas, and Earl. The motion passes.